Well, welcome. This is the second of a four-part series called Beyond Returning. So in our first class, we talked about what's been the typical endpoint or aim of different spiritual and religious traditions, of going back to the source, merging into the beyond, and so on. But in this series, we're looking at a different orientation as the purpose of creation and the purpose of our own individual lives. So I thought today we would take some time to think about what our individual purpose is. Like, why come to classes like this? Why come to All Saints? Why pursue studying different spiritual traditions? Well, most spiritual traditions would say that the point of that is awakening. And awakening to what? Awakening to a higher state of reality, awakening to a higher state of our own being. And then the journey towards awakening is usually described as our spiritual path. So we could be on a path we're just kind of not giving much thought to, going down the path, just reacting to situations that occur, getting through the day, kind of the same old modality, which could be nice. You know, we may have a very satisfying life and so on, but it may not be leading towards something more than the way we've usually understood ourselves and our journey. So it's helpful, like I've used this example before, when you click on Google, you get the search box, but if you don't put anything in the box and you hit enter, what's going to happen? Nothing. Google's waiting for you to enter something. If you don't have something in mind that you're moving towards, then transformation is unlikely to occur.
So the way I get at this is I'm a little more cheekier than you are, which is we're here to be human. I think that's one of the reasons why we go to church. In fact, when I talk to people who say I don't do church or I don't do religion, and I'll usually respond, and to some of you, I might have already responded this way. I'll say, that's fine. It's just inhuman to not participate in some sort of religious inquiry or some sort of what we call mystery inquiry. It's one of the most human things we do. In fact, some anthropologists suggest it is one of the most defining characteristics of the human experience is this pursuit of mystery. Not only of pursuing it, but digging into the meaning behind it or what it might say to us in this day. And you can go all the way back to the very, very beginning, and this idea that there is a mystery out there, and those mysteries are huge. And we know some of them right off the bat: birth, death. But then there's the mystery of love and maturity. There's the mystery of personal injury. There's the mystery of, food and growth. All of these mysteries are around us. And human beings have asked questions of these mysteries literally forever. And to not participate in an inquiry of these mysteries is to somehow live a life that I see as not a human life. So what I tell people is the reason we go to church or gatherings like this is because we're trying to live as full humans. And my contention is that people who are not coming to gatherings like this, or at least asking this question, or doing something like this in a community, might be asking lots of questions, but to not do it in community around a collection of stories, around a collection of wanderers, is to do that in probably the least human way possible.
Yes, and a couple of observations about this. One, and we've talked about this before, there's a certain amount of wisdom that we can discover by our own devices, turning within and so on. But there's another whole much richer aspect of wisdom that can only come by virtue of our relationship with whatever we're interacting with, whether it's people, whether it's with nature, and so on. So if we're not opening to something more than just beyond our separated self, we've already imposed a significant constriction or filter or limitation of what the possibilities are. And the second part of that observation is, in this process that Jonathan's referring to, inquiry into the mystery, which certainly is a part of human nature from the very beginning, wondering what those shiny points of lights were up the sky and so on, wondering what it was when there was an eclipse of the sun, all the natural phenomena of nature. But when the attempts to understand that are based on just pulling in things that fit in with, but maybe they're just a little bit more, a little bit different from what we've understood before, then again, we've imposed an even greater filter on what's possible, right, because we're never going to be able to get at what the mystery is about by that. It can never happen by the frame of reference that we've started with, that we're just trying to polish up and improve and add a little more data here and a little more data there, which is generally been the Western approach of inquiry and philosophy, and the approach in Western science up until quantum physics, which has realized that we can only understand things by virtue of our relationship with them, that it makes no sense to think of anything existing in total isolation from the rest of the universe. And so you can't study the rest of the universe and call that the mystery, even if you're including multiple dimensions of reality, by considering yourself as being a separated self that isn't apart and isn't in relationship with that.
Well, and what's great about that whole statement you said about quantum physics, this is a conversation we have regularly, is what quantum physics describes is that you can't, again, you can't understand a thing without you understanding your relationship, or at least inquiring of your relation to the thing, which sounds really fantastic, and the math behind it and the science behind it is spectacular. It's also what the mystics have been saying forever. I mean, the mystics have been saying, consider the lily of the fields. The mystics have been saying, if you read Braiding Sweetgrass, a wonderful, wonderful book about native cultures, the mystics have been saying, look at the trees and listen to what they teach us and our relationship with the trees. Look at the creation and understand our place in the creation and our relationship with all of these things around us. And quantum physics is now saying it, and to the mystics in the room, and there are some people that I've talked to who are both physicians in quantum physics sense, and also religious people. John Polkinghorne is one. I don't know if you want to know about Ilia Delio. She's one I quote frequently. That they say, when quantum physics says, oh wow, it's all related and it's all interconnected, and it's all stringy and webby and all this kind of stuff. And the mystics usually go of all faiths, usually say, yeah, we've been saying that forever. Now we have a way to describe it. And I think that is one of the most important things about this inquiry as well, is that as we go into these questions, not only from the mainly physical realm questions, but as we ponder what they might be teaching us, we might find ourselves on the leading edge of what might be understood as someday science. That what used to be called speculative mystical theology might actually be grounded in not only whimsical speculation of a large group of people, but might actually be the way things are. Here's a great example of this. Science fiction of 40 years ago is now, in many ways, the science of today. So if you read people like Ender's Game, read that book by Ender's Game, or other people who were writing way back long ago, or if you watch Star Trek, and just look at what they were doing when they were imagining a world in which time travel was about the connectedness of things, when they imagined a world in which multiple species had ways of connecting and communicating to one another that were more subtle than they were this kind of verbal thing. That is now becoming the way we understand everything. So I think that there's not only that we understand where we are now, but I think religious, spiritual inquiry, as we're calling it, or maybe we might call it meaning-making inquiry or contemplative inquiry, isn't only about making us better as humans, individually, me right here. It might help us together open up to new understandings of realities that the world might not be accessing yet. And that's pretty amazing as well. You know, we're going to have a story today, by the way, I keep going, in church about this experience of, we call it the mountaintop. It's called Transfiguration on the mountaintop. That's an ancient story the Christian narrative is not the only narrative that has transfiguration moments in it. Most major religions have some sort of transfiguration-like narrative in it. There's something going on there, and maybe we can learn from that and see that that actually might be real in ways we couldn't imagine it. We just made it fiction when we were kids. So that doesn't really happen. Maybe it's happening.
Yes. So let's say, all right, I'll pay attention to what people are saying from science, from spirituality, and so on, and I'll start trying to understand things in terms of my relationship with what's going on. Wonderful, essential step. However, there's another limitation that you may unwittingly be imposing if you're presuming that the only sphere of understanding is based on your relationship with present-day time and space.
Right.
In other words, what you're encountering now in your daily life in the world around you. That's certainly a wonderful place to be in. All kinds of wisdom can come from that. However, I'll go back to physics. Physics has shown that time is definitely relative. I remember at Caltech, my freshman year in physics class, the professor was explaining there's no such thing as universal simultaneousness. In other words, you can't have like a master clock that everyone can sync to and it's all happening at the same time. And I was saying, well, couldn't you, depending on where you are, and you know, he showed the math to show that's impossible. There's no such thing, because now it has a different meaning depending on your frame of reference, the speed you're going, and so on. And also physics has shown that there's a phenomenon called retrocausality, that things in the present can change things that have already happened in the past.
Right.
And things in the present can change things that haven't happened in the future, and you're going, what? And you've probably heard about this phenomenon called entanglement. You can have two particles that are entangled. One has an upspin, one has a downspin, and they always have to be like that. And you flip one, and the other one has to flip instantly, even if they're at the other ends of the Milky Way. That's been proven. But they've also shown that that phenomenon doesn't just happen spatially, it happens temporally across time. So you can have two particles that are entangled, one of which doesn't even exist anymore. So, I mean, you read some of these things, and there's Zen koans for the present day. Your mind is boggled. It's going, how can that be? Because on our usual assumptions that we take for granted and assume are absolute truths are not valid. And just as difficult as it has been for people to shift from a Newtonian frame of reference to a quantum frame of reference, it's difficult even for quantum physicists to shift their thinking in their lives to fit in with this, because that's how we've been wired. That's kind of the history of consciousness over the years. But that's evolving. It's changing. People are starting to wake up to there's more to reality than this. And physicists have postulated in string theory that there's 10 dimensions, there's 21 different dimensions. I've mentioned before that probably won't be very long before some of these large colliders are going to have absolute proof that there's other dimensions more than 3 of space and 1 of time. Well, the mystics have known this for thousands of years. So if that's the case, if we want to understand the mystery, then we have to become capable of experiencing our relationship with more dimensionality than what we've usually been encapsulated in. Stop and think about that for a second. We're encapsulated in a frame of reference which we take as the gospel truth, that the reality is present space and present time, and we think of history as what's already happened and the future as what's going to happen, but we don't have a way of relating to all of this is interacting. The past is interacting with the present and the future now, continuously, and everything is updating and everything is affecting everything else. So, back to the theme of this series, Beyond Returning, what a huge difference between just go back and erase everything and go back to where you came from to become capable of participating in this never-ending, always going to be mysterious, unfolding process of everything in manifestation.
I think one of the challenges of returning too, I've been asked a couple of times, there's a question in the church. And it's a question that I've said a few times that kind of has always, it's not always bugged me, but it bugs me. Which is, and it's often a well-intentioned question about reflecting on your past week, right? And the question is, what was your closest moment to Christ, right? And I immediately take that and expand, kind of like Richard Rohr, expand Christ to not be, Christ, the Hallmark card Christ, but Christ, the expansive and indwelling and intrusion of divine revelation in all time and space. Okay, what was your closest moment to Christ? And that's a very popular question in certain circles in Christianity. If anybody's a church geek, you've probably been around that question. And part of my struggle that I don't like about that is twofold. One, I don't know a closest moment to Christ or not. Or I'm trying not to. I'm trying not to experience life as though I am close to Christ or not. I might not be living fully present and fully accessing that, but there is no unchristing my experience. Okay? That's how I roll. But the other part of it is that it innately, and this is back to the idea of returning, it subtly focuses my attention backward. So I'm always looking backward as a reference point for where I am and how I'm doing. And I get that the notion of returning. I get the idea of going back to a place. I understand it, and most of us understand it intuitively. However, as I read the scripture, but also as I listen to the mystics, it's just not the way Jesus talked, and it's really not the way the mystics talked. That there's this expectation of forward movement. So Gospel of Mark, we're reading this in the church, is Jesus is always focusing forward. Elsewhere in the Gospel, he says, I'm not here to change Torah, because he's always looking backward, but he is teaching Torah in a new way with his eyes continually forward. And again, Jesus of Nazareth, he's my teacher, but he's not the only one. There are, again, the mystical consciousness says this all over the place. Muhammad consistently moved forward. I find great inspiration in most of the other mystics that I read, there's many that I don't read, who are looking forward and seeing what the possible next is where the unfolding is. And I think that's a helpful way, for me at least, to form a life, is to say, if I'm not returning to something, how do I find stability? How do I find a sense of placeness? And the way I'm coming to understand that is that my placeness is right here in the present tense, moving forward, using the wisdom of the past as helpful reference points or understandings, but always moving forward. So we use the teachings, but we use them as they help us point forward. That's the evolutionary thrust. And by the way, one of my favorite people to read is Carl Jung. This is what he was deeply into, this understanding that there's an ancient story, an ancient collection of wisdom narratives that goes beyond any sect or religion, that is universal. And we can draw from that as a way to craft a life as we are firmly placed here, moving ourselves forward.
Yes, and absolutely partaking of the wisdom of the past, but also realizing, let me do a little segue here. Jonathan said that why be part of a spiritual or religious community? Why be human? Because it's very human to do that. Well, Hazar Knight Khan said the purpose of spirituality is to become a natural human being. But what did he mean by that? He meant to become a human in the fullest sense of the word. And what does that mean? Religion says we're all created in God's image. Mystics say that everything is God, the one, whatever you want to call it. So each of us is a unique manifestation of that one ineffable being. Each of us is a unique expression. So being human means awakening to our capacity to participate in our never-ending relationship with the rest of all the other unique manifestations of the one being, not just in this realm, but in many other realms of existence that we can become capable of awakening to and experiencing. And then the possibilities are magnified dramatically, and even beyond that, that's pretty good for an individual to become capable of that. You can say Buddha and Jesus and all the great teachers over time became capable of that, but every human being can become capable of that, and every human being, according to even Arby, is capable of accessing a unique part of wisdom that nobody else could possibly do. And as I've said before, that wisdom isn't sitting somewhere in the Akashic record waiting for you to get clearance to check it out of the library. That wisdom is created. Revelation is not a revelation of something that's been. Revelation is a discovery of something that becomes, and becomes only by virtue of your relationship with it.
Yeah.
Only by virtue of what can emerge through the unique light of your being in relationship with the light of whatever it is that you are experiencing. So now think about, well, what does it mean to be on a spiritual path? Mm-hmm. How about thinking that instead of the purpose of the spiritual path is to use Google Maps to route you to your destination? Well, there is no final destination. The purpose of the spiritual path is to continually augment your capability of participating in this process, of continually increasing your capacity to awaken to the much richer reality than you were limited to by your own thinking and the thinking of conditioned humanity over the centuries, and then, and more importantly, the possibilities of what can come by virtue of your relationship with other beings, other people who are also engaged in this process of awakening. And then we can't even imagine from our usual frame of reference what could be from that. But isn't it wonderful to consider what that might be? Maybe it's a good time for questions.
I wrote that down. Okay. To augment your capability of participating in this process of awakening. That is delicious. Yes, let's pause, and we want to have some moments in the middle of, right now, where there might be questions. So does anybody have any questions or insights or places of departure right now as we are?
Yes, Gail.
I guess this question would be for Don. Could you say something about what even Arby would say about celestial earth and the Zoroastrians and the angels moving forward?
Well, I'll segue to Hazrat Khan. He had this beautiful phrase, "Let the heavens be reflected on the earth, Lord, that the earth may turn into heaven." Well, what we think of as heaven is nowhere else than right here. We live in a filtered reality in which we're only capable usually of perceiving ordinary space and time. But we can open our capacities to experience. Instead of thinking these as other realms, I've come to think of them perhaps what fits better for me, other vibrational realms of possibility. And they're all there, and we exist in all those other vibrational realms. The Sufis say we descended through the angelic realm coming to earth, but we continue to have an angelic body which is much larger than this body. We continue to have an angelic existence. We continue to have an existence on what's called the jinn plane, or the plane of genius, but we're not aware of those things because who teaches us that growing up? They just say, live a good life and be nice to be good. Let's do that. We could use more of that. But we're much more than that. It'd be like the beautiful organ we have upstairs if you closed all the stops and whatever, so it was just like a piano. Well, pianos are nice, but the difference between listening to a piano and listening to Bach on a big pipe organ, that's a big difference, right? You got all the overtones, and so our being is like that. We have harmonics and overtones of our being. We can modulate our consciousness to experience these different levels. So this notion of there's a book by Henry Corbin, Spiritual Body, Celestial Earth. Mm-hmm. We're already in it. We can't see it. It's there. When the people have mystical experiences, normally they think, well, they've gone someplace else, and they want to get back there because it seems so much better than here. But you don't have to travel any place. It's right here. We just have to become capable of awakening our subtle senses.
That is so huge. And not to jump in on the question as it relates to Zoroastrianism, But in Christianity, that same thread is there. And in fact, it's not even a thread. It's a major chord all the way through. It's called the Incarnation. I mean, that's the central mystery that we're celebrating every Sunday here, is this radical possibility that what we once formulated as there and here, or God's realm and our realm, is not the way it's happening. And the revelation of that in the story of Jesus Christ is not a revelation of a divine being transporting down like a science fiction, as much as I love sci-fi, like Superman on a spaceship and living in humanity, but then always having a home and an identity that is somewhere off planet, right? This is not the Superman story. This is, because the story that Jesus tells of Nazareth, but also the story that is consistent, and this is how Christianity does this as well, that the story that is consistently revealed through time, which is that the divine and what we might call non-divine, or God's space and our space, is no such thing. That divine space and our space is all interwoven. So then think back to that wisdom story of the bloody burning bush. I mean, we think that's a burning bush story like a telephone. We think it's like a telephone call from a distant God to an unresponsive humanity who needs a phone so the bush works. No, that's not the story. The bush keeps burning. Take off your feet, this is holy ground. Those are all signals that there is divine space in what we thought was only our space, that it's all interwoven and it's all placeness. Here's the crazy thing. Judaism, Christianity, Zoroaster, we don't own that narrative. I mean, you go back to native cultures and native traditions, you listen to the native peoples of this country, the native aboriginals of Australia, it's the same thing. The divine world is right here.
And we are not isolated, what we think of as human beings. We are human divine beings. If we are of the divine, created in the divine, and there's nothing but the divine, and we're unique expressions, then we can't possibly be separated from what we think of as the divine. It is our being. We're part of this totality that the miracle is the seeds germinate through all of creation in the form of people, plants, animals, stars, angels, the blossoms of divinity, but they're all expressions of that one, seeking to have more come through than's been available. So you, Diane.
So I'm thinking as you're speaking, and as I'm sitting here, of all these incredible beings that I know happily know some things about, and some I've just seen a miracle of each one of these beings, and listening to someone telling us, you really are a human divine being. I wish I could do a really good comic strip or something like that, showing the rays coming out of each one, and feathers, and all kinds of your own memories and your hopes and dreams. And we're being told, you really are that. So you can kind of zone in on that a little bit. And then I came in here, Kathy over here is a wonderful artist with thread, making different kinds of things. I'm thinking of embroidery right now. And I like to paint and do art. And so we're living these worlds of total possibility and unfolding, using our imaginations, using our what I call true imagination, which can refigure and reinvent everything that we thought we were and are. And a lot of it is, as we sow things, we have our own ways of dealing with the world and the mysteries of the world. And we found different ways. Sometimes we are teachers, sometimes we'll teach people positions of their bodies in order to access the gland, so the glands can fully activate and all this. And all the ways that we are these ways of connecting with the divine.
Right.
And if we can see all those as really different dimensions of us flexing these muscles of the human divine, It's all happening right here. And when we are in any situation, I think of it as that we can be the bridge, sometimes just without even saying anything, just beholding. I love the word behold. And as we behold, then we are allowing those things to connect too, and those beings to connect.
Good
It's
stuff.
a beautiful sewing process.
Beautiful
that
stuff.
we are engaged in. And sometimes it's just a symbol for what is really happening on the inside. So these are, I'm wanting to say each one of us is doing this in a different way. Each one of you has decided that there would be this class here today, and that you would participate in certain ways and have ways of unfolding it so that it becomes something really beautiful.
So what you're getting at is particularity a bit. I think that's a common question when religious leaders or when mystics talk this way. Is what do you do to them about two great questions? What do you do about particularity of expression and its cousin, free will? So how do we have freedom and how do we have particularity? We talked a bit about that last week, which is part of our participating in this is to navigate with agency and with free will. That we're not an amorphous whole, and we're not a kind of a large pudding, whereby we don't have individual characteristics and opportunities to create. In fact, we are particular beings that individually are empowered to live out our particularity with a healthy dose of freedom, and that actually is participating in that as well. So then the tapestry that is woven is both beautiful in the whole sense, but also beautiful in the very particular sense. As you go in closer and you see the particularity, I think that's for me a helpful continuation of what you're getting to.
And then one thought I would add to that is that we definitely behold, but also we are beheld. We are nurtured.
That's great.
If we open to this realization of the way things really are, then there's no end to the gifts that we receive from every expression of divinity that we encounter, from a tiny bug to an elephant. Doesn't matter what it is, to this clouds going across the sky. If we open to that relationship, then there's a tremendous potential for healing and restoration and circulation. And Paula, you have a question.
Oh, it's just more thoughts that I think what was said, that it keeps being told over and over and over, but in different ways until we get it. And like Tamar, we're becoming a new creation together. Or Thomas Merton standing on the side of the street saying, if everybody could realize that they're walking around shining like the sun. And Edward Hayes said, the incarnation happened at the beginning of creation, but people didn't get it. So they did, it's like this happened, Jesus came, people still didn't get it. It's like it takes what it takes for everyone to hear it in a way, in a language that they can understand. And I think even the relational aspect, to me, that's why we talk about Trinity, because even our God is relational. Even God is relational, how we look at it from that. And it could be the same as the different realms, that it's not new. There's new ways to say it and to talk about it and to understand. And Thomas Keating said that this is the first time maybe in culture where the different languages can start to hear each other of what that means.
Oh, yeah.
Like somebody might say the character of God in one tradition, and it means different things, but now we're like, oh, this is what that means to you. Or I've heard Piers Diaz say that contemplation and meditation kind of mean the opposite in the West and the East. But now we at least understand, oh, when you say that, that means that. So anyway.
Well, a comment about the idea of new creation. Ibn Arabi said something wonderful. He said, well, first of all, the Sufis have been saying this, and the physicists would agree, because they say time is not continuous. There's like the smallest unit of time, and then there's the next one. So both science in a way and mystics are saying the universe is reborn again at every instant. But Ibn Arabi says there's always a new creation, And the new creation is always self-similar to what's been before, or we'd be in trouble. Like if the next instant there was no gravity or oxygen.
It's helpful.
But he says it's self-similar, but it's never identical.
Never identical.
Which means no one knows what we think of as God can't possibly know what's going to emerge in the next instant of new creation. Why is that? Because it's up to the participation and the relationship of every being in every realm of existence with each other. And it's also determined by the intention of those beings. So if we're not really conscious and we're just kind of going through the day, not a whole lot's going to happen. But if we have a purpose-oriented focus that we'd like to live life in a way that leads to awakening, that leads to transformation, that leads to a much fuller way of experiencing ourselves and the world that we're in, then there's no end to what can take place. Mm-hmm. So who else has a question?
You know, they say, you know, God is always expanding, and we are always expanding. So, really what we're saying, there will never be an end, because God is always creating, and we are always learning, and God is learning with his expansion.
Absolutely.
So in the background, you were saying, just for the back, so can I repeat that? God is always learning, God is expanding as we are expanding, and that God is always learning as we are learning. And if there is really no end,
there will be no end.
Then there is no end. By the way, Jesus of Nazareth was asked a similar question. You know, when is the end? He's like, that's not my business. He was very clear about that.
Yeah.
The fullness of who, I don't know this work, only the Father in heaven knows this. He continually shoved it off on his dad. Sorry, I'm just kidding. That's not actually the way to say that. But I mean, I think there's this sense. I hear that.
I think that's why he said that you can do these things and even greater.
Even greater.
Than I. He was letting us know
Right.
that if we learn and he quits learning, then we can pass him.
Well, yes, and he said, when two or more are gathered in my name, then I am there. He was not talking about Jesus of Nazareth. He was talking about the I that is the essence of existence. And the more I-ness is available in the relationship, and that's why satsang, spiritual company, spiritual community is so important, then again, the possibilities of what can take place from that are unlimited. And I've said this over and over, and I'll probably keep saying it over and over in the future. I really believe that that's the only hope for change in the world, of the problems that have been intractable throughout the centuries. For enough people to wake up and become capable of engaging in a relationship with each other and the world at large that allows for these possibilities that were not on the table before that happened. There wasn't a capacity for that to take place. And so, when we get discouraged by things like global warming and wars and so on, there is something we can do about it. Maybe not necessarily in the short run, we're going to make everything beautiful, but we can help bring about an awakening of consciousness in ourselves and in other people, not by going around trying to preach to people, but I'm laughing because I wrote down like a little paragraph of ideas for things for us to talk about in this class. And so far we've gotten to the first two sentences.
Yes. Well, I think the other part of it too is, and what I wrote down as we were talking, is that the awakening this way, and it's worth repeating this kind of idea. If it sounds like we're repeating ourselves, it's because we think it's worth repeating. I think it's worth repeating, and every one of the mystics that I read at least repeated it themselves quite a bit. And here's why: because it disconnects from another narrative that views relationships, earthiness, the particularities of what's around us in a very transactional way. And that transactional analysis of our surroundings is a human trait. And while I'm not a big believer in the idea, I'm not a believer at all in the classic Protestant formulation of original sin, which is actually a Catholic Protestant formulation of original sin, I'm much more aligned with what the Jewish mystics teach as original brokenness, that there is a systemic brokenness, and I believe that that is it. That we view every relationship with every being and everything as transactional as it relates to us. And if we can disconnect from that and see everything as eternally possible, that everything we meet is filled with pregnant possibility, and every being we meet, every tree we meet, everything we meet, every human we meet is a radiant, shining light of divine love, then that might actually be what you're talking about. That might actually inform how we encounter our neighbor, and it would form how a small church envisions how we relate to our community. It might change how I look at my own self in the mirror. By the way, this is like half my sermon. This is half of what I'm going to preach on in about 30 minutes or so. So you can skip the sermon and go to Eucharist. But it might change everything. And changing things that systemically is a deep, threatening thing. If it feels like there's a lot of force to not view life that way, it's because there's a lot of force that forces us to not view life that way. I talk this way with my dad, and I talk about the beauty of all creation. He goes, well, yeah, but you like paper, don't you? I'm like, yes. He said, well, then creation is there for us to use and make paper. I'm like, yes, Dad. I mean, I love my father, but he is a classic transactional capitalist, that everything in the world is there for us to use in order to make us more comfortable. And that's not the only way to view things. There's another way to view things, is what we're saying.
So I'd like to chime in on this notion.
I just outed my dad on YouTube. This is great. I'm going to have to call him. It won't be the first time. And it won't be the last.
This notion of things were broken, which in traditional mystical Judaism, the broken shards of light, and we've talked about this. But I was just thinking right now, let's say you want to make a stained glass window, and you buy a sheet of red, a sheet of blue, a sheet of green, and go, oh, this is so pretty. Nice. Why would I want to break these up into pieces? And then you look at the marvels of stained glass in chapels and cathedrals around the world and say, that's why, because the possibilities of what can emerge from breaking down these basic parts can now emerge in something very beautiful. So the universe, the creation, the Big Bang, there just was a sea of subatomic particles initially after the Big Bang. But those, in a sense, and the Big Bang is thought to have been caused by a break in the symmetry of a higher order of the quantum vacuum. Something broke. Well, I'm glad it did. We wouldn't be able to have this class here today. we were in that undefined quantum realm, whatever. But in that ocean of particles, in a sense, you could say, well, there was a breakdown from one point of view, because you could say, well, it was just these pure subatomic particles, and now you have protons and neutrons and electrons and everything, and now you have elements, and now you have molecules, and now you have single-celled organisms, and now you have all the things in the world. Well, if it wasn't for that breakage of a simpler form, then the possibilities for self-organization and transformation could never exist. So this breaking down of the light in Judaism, I've talked about this before, instead of thinking you're supposed to just put these broken shards of light back together and restore them, you could think of them, well, each of these is a seed of possibilities of the way that light can be expressed in existence of the divine, unknown and unforeseen possibilities, so that more can become than was ever there before. We are enabling, get this, the transformation of God. Think that your life enables the transformation of God to a higher state of being, to a higher state of understanding. Just close your eyes for 30 seconds and put that thought in and see what happens.
Yeah.
And all of existence is awaiting your contribution to that symphony. You've got a piece of the music that nobody else can play, and it won't be complete without you.
Amen. I mean, I think there's such an important piece of that. The choir members are leaving, by the way. The story that I get to, because I do listen to stories. That's just, as I said before, I don't want to look backward, yet I'm a person of story. But there's this ancient wisdom story about Noah and the ark, right? And one of the important things that I learned recently, or the past couple of years from my rabbi friend, is that Noah in much of Judaism is not considered as much a heroic figure as we make Noah out to be in much of Christianity. The central figure in that story is God. And what do we learn of God in that story? We learn that God acted a way at the beginning of the story. This is great. Followed through on that action. And at the end of the story, what did God do?
Promised.
Repented. Mm-hmm. God put a bow in the clouds and said, never again will I do this. Never again. Made a promise of repentance. And there's some narratives that suggest that God heard all of and you can imagine the artistic renderings of this, that God heard all of the voices of those who were dying, and that God saw all of the loss of life and all of the lights gone out and wept. I mean, just imagine a world where we unplug from what many of us were raised in, which is that God is fixed, and that our job is to please a fixed God who has already rendered judgment, and we have to live into that rendered judgment. Right?
No.
Right? That's much of what we grew up in. If you're Protestant predestinationalist, if you're maybe Roman Catholic, then you have a God who has not rendered judgment yet, but is looking at you with a very cold calculus, and that calculus is very fixed, and you better get it right. And if you don't, there might be consequences, either immediate consequences or long-term consequences. What a very different relationship we might be in with the divine essence of all things, when we might open ourselves to recognize that maybe there's a deeper tradition that admittedly is not on the main stage often, and there's probably reasons for that, Greco-Roman philosophy being one of them. But there may be a deep tradition, as we listen to other traditions around the world, as we listen to traditions that precede traditions, native traditions, that says maybe the divine is intimately growing with us. And maybe that process of growth is part of what's going on. Certainly Moses changed God's mind a couple of times. You know?
And if I could add a thought to the Noah story and the rainbow and God repenting, can you imagine God saying and thinking, never again will I engage or believe that I am in a dualistic relationship with creation, that I'm separated from creation, that I'm not an integral part of that.
Imagine that.
So that's a pretty big awakening for the divine being. And I think that's probably a good place to stop.
Right? Thank you all.